The fluorescent tube above the walk-in freezer had been flickering for 3 weeks. Management said they'd fix it. Management said a lot of things. I'd learned to stop listening around month 2 of working night security at the KFC on Route 9, just outside of Danbury, Connecticut. The job was simple. Clock in at 10, walk the building every hour, make sure nobody broke in to steal the copper wiring again. Clock out at 6, go home to an apartment that smelled like someone else's cigarettes and sleep until the sun reminded me I had nothing else going on. My name is Marcus Bowen. I was 31, divorced 8 months, $214,000 in debt between student loans and the settlement. I took the job because TerraWatch Security needed a warm body, and I needed $412 a week before taxes. That's it. No heroic backstory. No secret military training. I was a guy with a flashlight and a polyester uniform shirt that said security in letters that were already peeling off. That Tuesday night started like every other. I pulled into the lot at 9:47, 13 minutes early because my apartment depressed me. The restaurant had closed at 9. Darnell, the night shift closer, was mopping behind the counter. He saw my headlights through the window and gave me the same lazy two-finger wave he always did. I let myself in through the side entrance with my keycard. The dining room lights were already off. The kitchen smelled like it always did. 11 herbs, reused fryer oil, and the faintly sweet funk of floor drains that hadn't been cleaned properly. Darnell had his earbuds in. He was 23, studying for his HVAC certification, and the most reliably unbothered person I had ever met. Marcus, he pulled one earbud out. Registers counted. Trash goes out in 20. I left you a drumstick in the warmer. Appreciated. Also, something's up with the back door. Keeps beeping like the seal isn't catching. I dropped my bag in the small office behind the kitchen. A glorified closet with a desk, 2 monitors showing camera feeds, and a chair with a cracked armrest. I'll check it. Cool. I'm out in 15. That was the rhythm. Brief exchange, minimal interaction, professional distance that neither of us minded. Darnell finished mopping. I ate my drumstick and pulled up the camera feeds. 4 angles, parking lot front, parking lot rear, dining room, kitchen. All static, all empty. The strip mall across the road. A nail salon, a vape shop, and a check cashing place. Sat dark and still. Route 9 had maybe 1 car pass every 10 minutes this time of night. I heard the back door alarm beep twice. Not the full intrusion alarm, just the magnetic seal warning. I walked through the kitchen to check it. The heavy steel door was closed, but the rubber gasket along the bottom had warped from years of humidity. It wasn't flush. I pressed it with my boot and the beeping stopped. That's when I noticed the car in the rear lot. A silver Nissan Altima, parked diagonally across 2 spaces with the driver's door open. Engine off, interior light on. No one visible inside, no one visible outside. It hadn't been there when I pulled in 7 minutes earlier. I keyed my radio. Standard protocol was to report anything unusual to the dispatch line TerraWatch ran out of Hartford. Dispatch, this is Site 14. Abandoned vehicle rear lot. Driver's door open. No occupant visible. Static. Dispatch, Site 14. Copy? More static. Then a fragment of something. Not a voice, not a tone. A sound like someone pressing a phone receiver against fabric. Then nothing. I switched channels. Same dead air. I checked my cell phone. 2 bars, but the call wouldn't connect. I tried texting my supervisor, Rita. The message sat with a spinning wheel for 30 seconds before failing. I chalked it up to the network. It happened out here. Route 9 sat in a gap between 2 cell towers, and coverage had always been unreliable. Darnell appeared behind me, backpack on one shoulder. Hey, you see that Nissan out back? He looked past me through the small window in the door. Probably someone from the bar down the road. They wander over sometimes. Door's open, though. He shrugged. Not our car, not our problem. I'm heading out. You good? Yeah, be safe. He pushed through the front entrance. The automatic lock clicked behind him. I watched through the dining room window as he crossed the front lot toward his Civic. And then I saw something that made my throat tighten in a way I couldn't immediately explain. Across Route 9 in front of the dark nail salon, a woman was standing completely still in the middle of the sidewalk. No coat, no purse, no phone. Arms at her sides, head tilted slightly forward. Just standing there. And Darnell was walking right toward his car without seeing her. I rapped on the window with my knuckle. Darnell didn't hear me. He was already at his Civic, tossing his bag across to the passenger seat. I looked back at the woman across the road. She hadn't moved, but something about her posture was wrong. Not the stillness of someone waiting or resting, but the stillness of something paused. Mechanical, like a video frozen on a single frame. Darnell's headlights swept the lot as he backed out. He turned right onto Route 9 and his taillights shrank into the dark. The woman across the road still hadn't moved. I told myself it was drugs, or shock, or sleepwalking. I told myself a lot of things in the next 40 seconds that all turned out to be wrong. I went back to the office and checked the rear camera. The Nissan was still there. Door still open, interior lights still burning. But now there was something on the pavement beside it. A dark, irregular shape near the rear tire. I leaned closer to the monitor. The resolution was terrible. 480p at best, in night mode. It could have been a jacket, a bag, a shadow from the angle of the lot light. It moved. Not much, a slow lateral drag, like something pulling itself along the asphalt with one arm. Then it stopped, then it moved again. The shape was a person. They were on the ground beside the Nissan, crawling toward the back door of the building. I grabbed my flashlight and went to the rear door. Protocol said I wasn't supposed to engage. Protocol said, call dispatch, report the situation, wait for police if necessary. But dispatch wasn't answering, and my phone still couldn't connect. I stood at the door and listened. I could hear something outside. A faint scraping sound, irregular, like a shoe dragging on rough pavement. I cracked the door open 2 inches. The lot light threw a cone of orange across the concrete. The person was about 15 feet away. A man, maybe mid-40s, wearing a gas station uniform. He was on his stomach, pulling himself forward with his left arm. His right arm was tucked beneath him at an angle that suggested it was broken. Or worse, his face was turned downward. A dark streak trailed behind him across the pavement. Sir, are you hurt? His head came up, not quickly, not the way a person in pain lifts their head when they hear a voice. It rose slowly, almost mechanically, like a camera adjusting on a mount. His eyes caught the lot light. They were open, wide, unblinking, and the skin around his mouth was dark with something I didn't want to identify. He made a sound. Not a word, not a groan. A wet, pressurized exhale, like air being forced through a clogged pipe. I stepped back inside and shut the door. The magnetic lock engaged with a solid click. My hands were shaking, and I didn't yet have a framework for why. People got hurt, people crawled, people looked disoriented. None of that should have made my adrenal glands light up like someone had hit a panic switch, but the sound he made. That wasn't pain. Pain has cadence. Pain has rhythm. That sound was something operating a human throat without understanding how it worked. I went back to the monitors. The man had reached the rear door. He was pressed against it now, his head making small, repetitive movements against the steel. Not banging, not pushing, just a rhythmic pressing, like a moth against glass. The front camera showed Route 9. 3 more people were now standing on the road, not walking, standing, spaced unevenly across both lanes. A man in a bathrobe, a teenager in a high school hoodie, an older woman in pajama pants, all motionless, all facing the KFC. My phone finally connected for 2 seconds. A single notification came through before it died again. A government alert. The kind they send for amber alerts and tornado warnings. 4 words on the screen before the signal dropped. Shelter in place immediately. I stared at the message. Then I looked at the monitors. The man at the back door had stopped pressing his head against the steel. He was just standing now, facing the door, waiting. And across the road, the 3 figures had taken their first step forward. I reached for the front entrance to check the lock. It was a commercial-grade automatic deadbolt, the kind that engaged at closing time and couldn't be opened from outside without a keycard. It was locked. I pulled on it to be sure. Solid. Then I remembered something that hollowed out my stomach. The rubber gasket on the back door. The one that didn't seal properly. The one that beeped because it couldn't hold a full magnetic lock. I ran. The back door was still locked. The deadbolt was engaged. But the gasket gap at the bottom let a thin whisper of outside air seep through, carrying a smell I'd never encountered. Something between spoiled copper and ozone. The beeping had stopped, which meant the system had either reset itself or stopped recognizing the fault. Neither option comforted me. I grabbed the mop bucket Darnell had left by the fryers and wedged it against the base of the door, then dragged a rubber floor mat over the gap. It was pathetic as a barricade, but it gave me the illusion of having done something. I needed that illusion badly. Back at the monitors, the three figures on Route 9 had crossed the road. They were in the front parking lot now, moving in a way that made my ribs feel like they were shrinking. They didn't walk together. They didn't coordinate, but they moved in the same direction with the same deliberate, unhurried pace, like iron filings responding to the same magnet. Their destination was obvious. They were coming to the building. I tried my phone again. Dead. No signal at all now. The landline on the office desk gave me a dial tone for half a second before dissolving into a droning hum that pulsed like a heartbeat. I hung up and stared at the two monitors as if they could tell me what to do. The man in the gas station uniform was still at the back door. The three figures reached the front entrance and stopped. The man in the bathrobe pressed both palms flat against the glass and held them there. The teenager stood about 2 feet behind him, head cocked sideways at an angle that would have been uncomfortable for anyone whose neck muscles were still reporting to their brain. The older woman drifted to the left, toward the drive-through window. The drive-through window. It was closed. The metal shutter was down, but the shutter locked from inside with a simple latch. Not a deadbolt. It was designed to keep rain out, not people. I moved through the kitchen to the drive-through station and checked the latch. It was a hook and eye setup, sheet metal and a bent piece of steel. I could have opened it with a firm push from outside. I looked around the kitchen for something to reinforce it. The prep table was bolted to the floor. The fryer units were plumbed in. The shelving racks were tall but light. Aluminum frames with plastic-coated wire shelves. I grabbed one and turned it sideways, pressing it flat against the shutter from the inside. Then I pulled the heavy flour bin from the storage shelf and set it on top of the rack's base to add weight. It wouldn't hold against sustained pressure. I knew that, but I was operating on a logic that had nothing to do with engineering and everything to do with not standing still. I did a full walk of the building. The KFC was a standard franchise layout. About 2,800 square feet, single-story, flat roof. The dining room had floor-to-ceiling windows along the front and one side. The kitchen had no exterior windows. The office had one small frosted glass window that didn't open, reinforced with wire mesh embedded in the glass. The restrooms had no windows. The walk-in freezer and walk-in cooler shared a back wall with the exterior. The employee break area was a folding table next to the ice machine. Entry points, back door, drive-through window. That was it. 3 points of vulnerability. I'd secured 2 as best I could. The front door was the strongest. Commercial glass, steel frame, automatic deadbolt. It would hold unless something hit it with more force than a human body could generate at walking speed. I returned to the office and sat down. The monitors showed me everything I didn't want to see. The figures at the front hadn't moved from the glass. The man at the back hadn't moved from the door. The older woman was now standing directly in front of the drive-through shutter. She wasn't touching it. She was just facing it. 6 minutes had passed since Darnell left. It felt like an hour. I opened the desk drawer looking for anything useful. A box of pens, a KFC operations manual, a roll of packing tape, a small first aid kit, a ring of keys I didn't recognize, and underneath everything, a folded newspaper from 2 weeks ago. The headline on the front page said something about a quarantine advisory in Fairfield County. I hadn't read it then, I read it now. The article mentioned an atypical contagion event at a long-term care facility in Bridgeport. 17 residents, unusual neurological symptoms, facility locked down. CDC consulted. 17. I looked at the front camera. Two more figures had appeared at the edge of the lot, coming from the direction of the bar down the road. One of them was dragging something behind it. I didn't zoom in. I didn't want to know. At 10:31, the power flickered. Not a full outage, more like a stutter. The fluorescent tubes in the kitchen blinked twice. The fryer pilot lights held steady, and the camera monitors scrambled into static for about 4 seconds before recovering. When the image came back, the count had changed. I had been tracking the figures outside the way someone tracks clouds before a storm. Not with precision, but with a growing animal certainty that something was building. There were now 9 of them, 4 at the front, 2 at the back, 3 distributed along the sides of the building with no clear purpose. I picked up the phone on the desk again. Dead. The hum was gone now. Just silence, the kind that feels heavier than noise. I tried the radio once more, cycling through all 4 channels TerraWatch used. Nothing. Not even static. Whatever infrastructure connected me to the outside world had quietly disconnected itself while I wasn't paying attention. Then the front glass cracked. Not shattered. Cracked. A single branching fracture that spread from the point where the man in the bathrobe was pressing his forehead against the pane. He hadn't struck it. He was just leaning into it with constant, patient pressure, the way tree roots split concrete. Not through force, but through refusal to stop. I needed to reinforce the front. I went to the dining room and started dragging booth seats toward the window. They were the old-fashioned kind. Molded fiberglass shells bolted to steel pedestals anchored in the floor. The bolts were rusted. I couldn't move them. I tried the freestanding chairs instead, stacking them against the glass in a crude lattice. It looked absurd, a kindergarten barricade. The crack grew while I worked. A second branch appeared, then a third. The man's forehead left a dark smudge on the glass where skin had abraded away. He didn't flinch. He didn't feel it. He just kept pressing with a persistence that made my jaw clench so hard my molars ached. I heard a sound from the kitchen, a metallic scraping. The drive-through shutter rattling against the aluminum rack I'd braced it with. The older woman had found the shutter's edge and was working her fingers beneath it. I ran back and pushed against the rack. Her strength wasn't extraordinary. It was just constant. She pulled with the same tireless, mechanical insistence as the man at the front glass, and I realized that their advantage wasn't power. It was the absence of hesitation. No fatigue, no pain response, no second guessing. They would keep going until something gave. I needed weight. I opened the walk-in cooler and grabbed the largest thing I could find, a 50-pound box of frozen chicken pieces. I stacked it on the rack's base next to the flour bin. Then another box, then a case of cooking oil. The shutter stopped rattling, for now. I was sweating through my uniform. My hands smelled like frozen poultry and grease. I stood in the middle of the kitchen under the flickering fluorescent and took my first full breath in 20 minutes. The air tasted like fryer oil and something else. That copper ozone smell seeping through every imperfect seal in the building. The radio on my belt crackled. I nearly dropped it, pulling it to my ear. Anyone on TerraWatch frequency, this is Danbury PD Mobile Unit 7. Route 9 corridors compromised. All personnel shelter in place. Do not attempt vehicle transit. Repeat, do not. Gone. The transmission lasted maybe 8 seconds before dissolving into white noise. But it was enough. Compromised. A police officer had used the word compromised to describe a public road. That word carried a weight that rearranged my understanding of the situation. This wasn't a localized incident. This wasn't one disturbed person or a small group of intoxicated wanderers. The road itself was being described as lost territory. I went back to the monitors. The front camera showed Route 9 in both directions. To the east, toward downtown Danbury, I could see headlights. But they weren't moving. A cluster of vehicles sat motionless on the road, some with doors open, some dark. To the west, nothing. No lights, no movement, except the slow migration of more figures emerging from the tree line on the far side of the strip mall. I counted 4, then 6. Then I stopped counting because the number had stopped mattering. What mattered was trajectory. They were all moving toward light, toward sound, toward the building where I was breathing and sweating and thinking, toward me. The first rational decision I made was inventory. If I was going to be here for hours, and the Danbury PD transmission suggested I was, then I needed to know exactly what I had. I found a pen in the back of a KFC daily operations sheet and started writing. Food, substantial. The walk-in cooler held raw chicken in various stages of prep, pre-made coleslaw, mashed potatoes in sealed containers, biscuit dough, corn on the cob, and several cases of gravy mix. The walk-in freezer had more frozen chicken, pie crusts, and what looked like 40 pounds of green beans. None of it required anything beyond the existing kitchen equipment to prepare, and the gas lines were still active. If the power held, I had enough food for one person for weeks. That math gave me a grim kind of comfort. Water. The kitchen sinks ran on municipal supply. Still flowing, I filled every clean container I could find. Prep buckets, stock pots, the mop bucket after I rinsed it 3 times. If water stopped, I had maybe 15 gallons stored, enough for days. Weapons, almost none. A box cutter in the office drawer, 2 kitchen knives, 1 serrated bread knife, 1 chef's knife that hadn't been properly sharpened in months, a heavy steel ladle that could serve as a blunt instrument in desperation, a fire extinguisher mounted by the back door. That was everything. I wasn't armed. I was equipped for making fried chicken, and nothing about that skill set translated to survival. Light. The building ran on its own circuit from the power grid. The parking lot lights were on a separate timer. I found the breaker panel in the office closet and identified each circuit. Kitchen, dining room, exterior signs, walk-in units, HVAC. I killed the dining room lights and the exterior sign. Anything that advertised my presence to the growing crowd outside was a liability. When the dining room went dark, the figures at the front glass paused. Not all of them. The man in the bathrobe continued his relentless pressure. But 2 of the newer arrivals turned slightly, as if recalibrating. Then they resumed. The darkness slowed them. It didn't stop them. I filed that information away. At 11:15, my phone surged to life for 12 seconds. 3 text messages came through in rapid succession, all from the county emergency system. The first repeated the shelter-in-place order. The second used language I had to read twice. Avoid contact with symptomatic individuals. Do not attempt physical restraint. Infection vector confirmed fluid exchange. The third was a single line, National Guard activation in progress. National Guard. The words sat in my head like stones dropped into still water. Concentric rings of implication spreading outward. If the National Guard was being activated, this had exceeded what local police could handle. If it had exceeded what local police could handle in Danbury, Connecticut. A mid-sized city with a functioning emergency services infrastructure. Then whatever was happening was not small. I pocketed the phone and returned to the monitors. The rear camera showed that the figure count behind the building had grown to 5. One of them had found the dumpster and was standing beside it, one hand resting on the lid, head tilted as if listening. The front camera showed a slow but continuous stream of figures entering the parking lot from Route 9. Some came from the stalled vehicles. Some emerged from the strip mall side. They moved with that same unhurried certainty. Not running, not stumbling, just advancing with the patience of something that had no internal clock telling it to stop. I checked the front glass. The crack had spread to about 2 feet in length, branching in 3 directions. The stacked chairs pressed against it vibrated slightly with each pulse of pressure from outside. I estimated the glass would hold for a few more hours. Maybe. Commercial tempered glass was strong, but it was designed to resist impact, not sustain static load. This was a siege, and sieges aren't won by the wall. They're won by time. And I was the only one in this equation who had a finite supply of it. I sat in the office and ate a cold biscuit. It tasted like flour and salt, in the vague memory of a functioning world. I chewed slowly, watching the monitors, and began to accept a truth I'd been holding at arm's length since the first government alert. Nobody was coming soon. Whatever was happening out there was happening everywhere. And I was alone in a fast food restaurant with a bread knife and 50 pounds of frozen green beans. I started planning. The roof. That was the first idea that had any structural logic to it. The KFC had a flat commercial roof accessible through a ceiling hatch in the storage room above the walk-in units. I'd noticed it during my first week on the job. A 2-foot square access panel with a twist latch. I'd never opened it. I'd never had a reason to. Now I had several. The ceiling in the storage room was 10 feet high. I dragged the aluminum step ladder from the maintenance closet and positioned it beneath their hatch. The latch was stiff, but it turned. I pushed the panel up and slid it aside. Warm air fell through the opening. The roof had been absorbing residual heat from the kitchen's exhaust system. I climbed up. The roof was tar and gravel, flat, roughly 2,800 square feet mirroring the floor plan below. A large HVAC unit sat near the center, humming. 2 exhaust vents from the kitchen released thin columns of heat. The roof edge had a short parapet wall, maybe 18 inches high. Enough to conceal me if I stayed low, but not enough to stop anyone who could climb. I crawled to the front edge and looked it down. The parking lot held 19 of them. I counted twice. They stood in loose clusters, some facing the building, some facing nothing. The ones nearest the front glass were still pressing. The crack was visible from up here. A jagged white line across the lower pane. Route 9 was unrecognizable. The stalled cars stretched in both directions, some with headlights still burning, some dark. Among them, figures moved with that slow, patient drift that I now understood was not aimlessness, but a kind of distributed searching. They moved towards stimuli, light, sound, vibration. And when the stimulus faded, they simply waited. To the north, past the strip mall, I could see the glow of a larger fire. Something structural was burning. Maybe a house, maybe a business. The flames reflected off low clouds and turned the sky the color of a healing bruise. I heard no sirens. That absence was louder than any alarm. I moved to the rear edge. The back lot had 7 of them now. The man in the gas station uniform had been joined by others. A woman in scrubs, a heavyset man in a football jersey, a child. I stopped on the child, maybe 10 or 11, wearing pajamas with a cartoon character I couldn't identify from this height, standing with the same mechanical stillness as the adults. I turned away from the edge and pressed my back against the HVAC unit and breathed through my mouth until the tightness in my throat subsided. The roof gave me visibility. It gave me a secondary escape route. Not a good one, but the strip mall across the road had a flat roof at roughly the same height, and the gap between buildings was maybe 25 feet, too far to jump. But if I could find material to bridge it, a ladder, planking, something, it became an option, slim but real. I logged it mentally and climbed back down. At 11:48, the walk-in freezer's compressor cycled off and didn't restart. The power was still on. The kitchen lights held, the monitors glowed, but the freezer unit's dedicated circuit had tripped. I checked the breaker panel. The freezer's breaker was in the off position. I flipped it. It tripped again immediately. Something in the compressor had failed. Maybe an overloaded motor, maybe a short in the wiring. The freezer would start warming. Within hours, the frozen inventory would begin to thaw. This wasn't a crisis. I had enough food in the cooler and dry storage to sustain myself for a long time. But the freezer failure represented something I couldn't afford to ignore. Systems were degrading. The building was designed to operate with daily human maintenance. Restocking, cleaning, equipment checks, vendor deliveries. Without that support cycle, things would start failing. The freezer was first, the fryer oil would go rancid, the plumbing would develop pressure issues if the municipal water system lost power. The HVAC would overwork and trip its own breaker. Entropy had a timeline, and it was running parallel to the siege outside. I was trapped inside a machine that was slowly forgetting how to function. And outside, the things that had forgotten how to be human were growing in number by the hour. At 1:14 in the morning, someone knocked on the back door. Not one of them. They didn't knock. They pressed, they scraped, they applied patient mechanical force. This was a knock. 3 sharp raps, human cadence, human urgency. "Hello? Is someone in there? Please, the door." A woman's voice strained, breathing hard. I went to the rear camera. The monitors showed 2 people at the back door. A woman, maybe mid-30s, holding the hand of a teenage boy. She was looking directly at the camera, which meant she knew it was there, which meant she was thinking clearly. The figures that had been in the rear lot were gone. No, not gone. They'd moved. I checked the front camera. The crowd had shifted toward the east side of the building, pulled by something I couldn't identify. A sound, maybe. A car alarm in the distance. Whatever it was, it had drawn them away from the rear temporarily. I can see the camera light. I know someone's in there. My name is Priya Chandrasekharan. This is my son, Naveen. We came from Worcester Street. Our car died. Please. I stood at the back door with my hand on the deadbolt and felt the full weight of the decision pressing against my sternum. Opening the door meant risking the seal. It meant introducing two unknown variables into the only safe space I had. It meant potential exposure to whatever fluid-borne pathogen those emergency techs had described. Not opening the door meant listening to a mother and her son die on the other side of a steel panel while I ate cold biscuits. I turned the deadbolt. Priya pushed through the moment the door cracked. Naveen was right behind her. I slammed it shut and re-engaged the lock. The entire exchange took less than 3 seconds. Priya leaned against the prep counter and pressed both hands over her face. Her breathing was ragged but controlled. Someone managing their own panic with conscious effort. Naveen stood beside her, clutching a school backpack to his chest. He was maybe 15, tall for his age, eyes wide but dry. Thank you. Priya lowered her hands. Her face was drawn, lips cracked, a thin scratch across her left cheekbone. She wore a hospital lanyard around her neck. Danbury Hospital, Department of Internal Medicine. We've been moving for 2 hours. Route 9 is impassable by car. We tried Worcester to Maple, Maple to Old Ridgebury. Everything feeds back to stalled traffic and... She paused. And them. How many did you see? Hundreds, maybe more. Downtown is overrun. The hospital... Her voice caught for the first time. She swallowed it back. The hospital fell around 11. I was on shift when the first wave came through the ER. They'd been bringing in bite victims for hours. We didn't understand what was happening. By the time we did, the victims were turning in the hallways. I grabbed Naveen from the waiting room and we ran. He was at the hospital? I couldn't find a sitter. He does homework in the break room during my night shifts. She looked at her son. He looked at the floor. It's a thing we do. I gave them water from one of the prep buckets. Priya drank carefully. Naveen drank like someone who'd been running. I watched them both for signs of injury. Any open wound, any bite, any discoloration around the extremities. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, but the emergency alert had said fluid exchange, and I was operating on the assumption that meant blood or saliva contact. Are either of you hurt? No. Priya understood the question behind the question. She extended both arms, turned them over, pulled up Naveen's sleeves. Clean skin, no marks. We weren't touched. We were careful. You're a doctor? Internist. But I've seen enough tonight to tell you that medical training is almost useless against this. The pathology doesn't follow anything I've studied. Cellular death followed by motor reactivation without higher cortical function. I watched it happen to a colleague in real time. 12 minutes from bite to cessation to reanimation. She steadied herself against the counter. 12 minutes. The number landed like a verdict. 12 minutes. That was the clock. If you were bitten, you had 12 minutes of being yourself. Priya oriented herself quickly. Within 10 minutes, she had assessed the building's layout, asked about entry points, examined the crack in the front glass, and returned to the kitchen with a set of observations that were more useful than anything I'd generated in 3 hours alone. Having a structured, analytical mind in the room changed the texture of the crisis. Fear was still present, but it now had a colleague. The front glass is your primary failure point, she said, standing over the monitors in the office. That crack is load-bearing now. Every additional figure that presses against it accelerates the timeline. Once that pain goes, the dining room is open space with nothing between them and the kitchen except a service counter. I know. Do you have anything to board it with? There's a storage room with some ceiling tiles and metal framing strips. Nothing substantial. What about the tables in the dining room? Bolted to the floor, she pressed her lips together, thinking. Naveen sat on the office floor with his backpack, eating a biscuit with the methodical focus of someone who'd been told to stay quiet and not take up space. I noticed he had a phone, screen cracked, no signal, and a worn paperback novel sticking out of his bag, a kid who'd learned to be portable. Marcus! Priya was looking at the front camera. There's a pattern. Watch the ones at the glass. I looked. The figures at the front entrance were pressing in a loose synchronization. Not coordinated, but entrained. When one surged forward, the others followed a half-second later, like a delayed echo. The pressure wasn't random, it was oscillating. Push, release, push, release. Each cycle drove the crack a fraction deeper. They're resonating, Priya said. Not intentionally. It's like a feedback loop. One pushes, the vibration triggers the others. The glass is absorbing cyclical stress instead of static pressure. That's worse. Cyclical loading causes fatigue failure. The glass won't crack further and then shatter all at once. It'll weaken in sections and give way in pieces. How long? I don't know. I'm not an engineer. But if the cycle frequency stays constant and the crowd keeps growing, she looked at me. Hours, not days. That recalibrated everything. I'd been thinking in terms of waiting. Shelter in place. Let the National Guard arrive. Hold the perimeter. Priya had just explained that the perimeter had an expiration date measured in hours, and the cavalry might not exist. We need a fallback position, I said. The walk-in cooler. I stared at her. That's a box with one door. It's a box with one reinforced steel door, insulated walls and no windows. If the front glass fails and they enter the dining room and kitchen, the cooler is the only room in this building they can't push through. And if they surround it, then we're trapped inside a refrigerator, but alive. She was right. I hated that she was right. The walk-in cooler was 6 feet by 8 feet, heavy gauge stainless steel walls, a door with a mechanical latch that could be locked from inside. It was built to maintain temperature against external heat. That same insulation would muffle sound. If we went dark and silent inside the cooler, they might lose interest. The stimuli that drew them, light, sound, vibration, would be cut off. We prep it now, I said. Move food, water, the first aid kit, the flashlight, everything we might need if we have to lock ourselves in. How long could we stay in there? Depends on the temperature. The compressor is still running on the cooler. It'll stay cold. If we prop the door slightly when we're inside, we don't freeze. If we seal it, we have limited air. Naveen spoke for the first time. His voice was quieter than I expected, careful and precise like his mother's. The cooler has a ventilation system. There's a small fan unit above the evaporator that exchanges air with the kitchen. Even with the door closed, you won't suffocate. Priya and I both looked at him. I read the operations manual in the break room, he said, and went back to his biscuit. We started preparing the cooler. By 2:30 a.m., we had transformed the walk-in cooler into a survival cache. 3 cases of bottled water, enough food for a week if we rationed carefully, the first aid kit, the flashlight and 2 packs of batteries from the office drawer, a stack of clean towels from the kitchen, the box cutter, both kitchen knives, the fire extinguisher. We arranged everything along the walls so the center remained clear enough for 3 people to sit or lie down. The cooler hummed around us, its evaporator fan cycling with a low mechanical rhythm that was oddly steadying. The temperature held at 38 degrees, cold enough to be uncomfortable, warm enough to survive. I propped the door open with a folded towel to maintain airflow while we worked outside. Priya had been quiet for a few minutes, standing at the rear camera, watching the figures behind the building with the clinical focus I'd already come to recognize as her default mode under stress. She cataloged things. She observed patterns the way I scan for entry points. They're degrading, she said. I came to look. She pointed at the man in the gas station uniform. The first one I'd seen crawling across the pavement. He was standing now, but listing to his right, his shoulder dropped at an angle that suggested the connective tissue in his torso was failing. His movements, which had been slow but fluid earlier, were now jerky, interrupted by pauses where his limbs seemed to lose their signal. The motor function is deteriorating over time. Whatever is driving them isn't sustainable. The reanimation doesn't repair tissue. It just overrides the failure signals. Eventually, the body breaks down too far to sustain movement. How long? The colleague I watched at the hospital reanimated at 11:20. If these ones turned around the same time, they've been active for over 3 hours. She pointed at the gas station worker's right leg, which was dragging now instead of stepping. Some of them are already losing mobility. Give it another 6 to 8 hours and the earliest ones might become immobile entirely. This was the first piece of information since the crisis began that suggested a finite enemy. Not endless, not unstoppable, degradable. The infection burned through its host like a fire through dry wood. Bright and forceful at first, then weakening as the fuel was consumed. But the new ones, I said. The new ones will be fresh, faster, stronger. Every new infection restarts the clock. She turned from the monitor. The danger isn't the ones outside right now. It's the ones that haven't turned yet. Somewhere out there, people are being bitten, and in 12 minutes, they'll be added to the count. So it's a wave, waves, plural. Each generation more dispersed, less concentrated. The initial outbreak was dense. The hospital, the care facility in Bridgeport, those first waves hit concentrated populations and created a surge. But as it spreads into suburban areas, the density drops. Fewer people per square mile means fewer transmissions per hour. The wave attenuates. I leaned against the prep counter. You're saying it slows down? Mathematically, yes, if containment measures hold at the perimeter. Highway roadblocks, military cordons. The exponential spread flattens. But if containment fails, she let the sentence die. She didn't need to finish it. Naveen had moved from the office to the dining room. I found him crouched behind the stacked chairs, watching the figures through the cracked glass with an expression I couldn't read. Not fear, not curiosity. Something more complex. The look of a kid recalibrating his understanding of what the world was and what it could do to him. You okay? He nodded without looking at me. The one in the bathrobe is my neighbor, Mr. Alderman. He's been our neighbor for 6 years. He taught me to play chess. I didn't have a response for that. There was no response for that. A 15-year-old was watching his chess teacher press his disintegrating forehead against a KFC window with the mindless persistence of a broken machine, and no combination of words in the English language could make that experience navigable. I put my hand on his shoulder. He didn't flinch. He didn't lean into it either. He just kept watching. Come back to the kitchen, I said. We need your help with something. He stood and followed me without looking back. It didn't shatter the way I expected. Not a dramatic explosion of fragments. The tempered pane buckled inward in sections. The cyclical pressure Priya had described finally exceeding the material's fatigue limit. A large triangular piece folded inward and crashed against the stacked chairs. Then the rest followed, falling in heavy, crumbling sheets that sounded like ice calving off a glacier. The alarm system, still connected to some residual power source, screamed to life. A piercing, oscillating tone that filled the building and broadcast our location to every infected body within a quarter mile. Cooler! Now! I was already moving, grabbing Naveen by the arm, pulling him toward the kitchen. Priya was ahead of us, holding the cooler door open. The dining room behind us filled with sound. The alarm, the scrape of bodies climbing through the destroyed window frame, the wet thud of feet on tile. Naveen tripped on the threshold between the dining room and the kitchen. I caught him by the backpack strap and hauled him upright. Priya was shouting something I couldn't hear over the alarm. I shoved Naveen through the cooler door, turned back to the kitchen, and saw the first one come through the service counter pass through. It was the teenager in the high school hoodie. Up close, the wrongness was absolute. His skin had a gray waxen quality, like candle tallow. His eyes were open but unfocused. Not blind, but operating on a different input than sight. He moved toward the sound of the alarm with mechanical directness, arms forward, fingers curled into loose hooks. I grabbed the fire extinguisher off the wall and discharged it directly at his face. The chemical spray hit him at point-blank range. He staggered. Not from pain, but from the physical force of the pressurized stream. The white cloud filled the pass-through and obscured the doorway. I dropped the extinguisher, ran for the cooler, and Priya pulled the door shut behind me. The latch engaged with a metallic snap that felt like a coffin lid closing. Inside the cooler, we stood in total darkness for 2 seconds before I clicked on the flashlight. 3 faces, pale and breathing hard, condensation forming on every surface, the evaporator fan humming above us, and on the other side of the steel door, the sound of the kitchen filling with bodies. We heard them. Not words. They had no words, but sounds. The shuffle of feet on tile, the thud of bodies encountering equipment, the clatter of the aluminum shelving rack being knocked over, the fryer handle being struck. They moved through the kitchen the way water fills a container, formlessly, following the path of least resistance, occupying every available space. One of them reached the cooler door. We heard the contact. A palm pressed flat against the steel, then a second hand, then the beginning of that same rhythmic pressure. Push, release, push, release. But the cooler door was different from the front glass. It was insulated steel, 3 inches thick, hinged on industrial-grade hardware. It was designed to maintain a temperature differential against external conditions. Structural compromise would take days, not hours, under this kind of load. "They can't get through," Priya whispered. "Not through the door," I said. We listened. The alarm was still screaming, muffled now by the insulated walls. The sounds in the kitchen were chaotic. Metal striking metal, equipment being displaced, the fryer unit hissing as something knocked against its housing. Then a new sound, a heavy, sustained creak from above. Something was on the roof. Multiple somethings, moving across the tar and gravel surface with the same unhurried gait. Naveen looked up. The evaporator unit sat in the ceiling, connected to the condenser on the roof via refrigerant lines that passed through a small penetration in the wall. It was sealed with foam insulation and a metal collar. It was not a viable entry point, but the psychological weight of knowing they were above us, on every side surrounding us in 3 dimensions, was crushing. "Turn off the flashlight," Priya said. "Conserve batteries." I clicked it off. The dark closed around us like a fist. In the blackness, with the hum of the evaporator and the muffled chaos of the kitchen, I felt something I hadn't felt since the beginning. Not fear, but a terrible clarity. We were not going to be rescued in time. Whatever was going to save us would have to come from inside this room. I know the exact number because Naveen had a digital watch. A cheap Casio with a green backlight that became our only anchor to objective time. Every 30 minutes, he would press the button, and the pale green glow would show us the numbers. 4 o'clock, 4:30, 5:24. Each check was a small ritual of sanity, proof that time was still passing, even though the darkness made it feel geologic. The sounds in the kitchen gradually changed. The initial frenzy of bodies colliding with equipment settled into a quieter, more disturbing pattern. The slow shuffle of persistent occupation. They were in the kitchen. They weren't leaving. But their activity had dropped. Without sustained stimuli, they were entering something like a dormant state. Still present, still standing, but quieter. The alarm had stopped at 4:12. Either its battery died or someone at a remote monitoring station had killed it. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. Every creak of the building structure, every tick of the cooling system, every breath the 3 of us took became amplified into something enormous. Priya spoke first, her voice barely above a murmur. "We need to discuss options." "The roof," I said. "Access hatches in the storage room. If we can get from the cooler to the storage room without encountering them in the kitchen, we can get to the roof." "And from the roof?" "I saw it earlier. The strip mall across Route 9 has a flat roof at a similar height. If we can bridge the gap, 25 feet across a public road filled with infected." I didn't say it was a good option. Naveen's watch lit up. 5:24. Sunrise would come around 6:40. Light would change the dynamics. We could see, but so could anyone alive out there who might help. The degradation Priya had described would be further along for the earliest infected. Some of them might be immobile by dawn. "There's another factor," Priya said. "The ones in the kitchen have been active for over 6 hours if they were part of the initial wave. Their motor functions should be significantly compromised by now. The ones that came through the window." They were already slower. The teenager's gait was deteriorating. If we wait another hour, the earliest ones in the kitchen may be unable to pursue effectively. Maybe. It's biology, Marcus, not a guarantee. But cellular degradation doesn't negotiate. The plan formed in whispered fragments over the next 30 minutes. We would wait until 6 o'clock, roughly 9 hours since the likely start of the initial outbreak. By then, the first wave infected should be in advanced motor decline. We would open the cooler door slowly. If the kitchen was passable, we'd move to the storage room. Up through the hatch, onto the roof. From there, we'd assess, maybe signal for help, maybe find a way down on the far side of the building where the infected density was lower. The plan had a dozen failure points. We acknowledged each one without dwelling on any of them. Planning in a crisis isn't about certainty. It's about choosing a direction and committing to it before paralysis makes the choice for you. At 5:50, I pressed my ear against the cooler door. The kitchen was quiet, not silent. I could hear the low or rhythmic sound of bodies shifting weight, the occasional scrape of a shoe on tile. But the frantic activity of the initial breach was gone. They'd settled. I looked at Priya. She nodded. Naveen pulled the straps of his backpack tight against his shoulders. I picked up the chef's knife and held it at my side, not because I thought it would save me, but because holding something gave my hands a purpose other than shaking. I put my hand on the latch. Slow, Priya breathed. No sound. I turned the latch millimeter by millimeter. The mechanism was well maintained. It moved without protest. The door unsealed with a soft exhalation of cold air. I opened it 1 inch, then 2, then wide enough to see the kitchen through the gap. What I saw made me revise every assumption about what this night had cost. The kitchen was destroyed, not ransacked. Destroyed the way weather destroys, without intent or malice. The fryer unit was tipped on its side. Oil pooled across the tile in a dark reflective sheet. The prep table was displaced from its bolts, shoved against the far wall. The aluminum shelving I'd used to brace the drive-through shutter was scattered in pieces. Ceiling tiles had been pulled down, hanging in ragged strips. Among the wreckage, 11 of them stood in various states of stillness. Most were in the dormant posture Priya had described. Upright but motionless, head slightly forward, arms slack. The gas station worker was on the floor, propped against the overturned fryer. His right leg had failed completely, bent at a wrong angle beneath him. He was still animate. His fingers twitched in small, irregular patterns. But he was no longer mobile. The path to the storage room was partially blocked. 2 of the dormant figures stood between the cooler and the storage room door, about 8 feet apart. To reach the door, we'd need to pass within arm's reach of both. I signaled Priya and Naveen to wait. Then I stepped into the kitchen. The oil on the floor made every step treacherous. I placed each foot with glacial care, distributing my weight to avoid any sound. The nearest figure, the woman in scrubs, was 3 feet to my left. Her eyes were open. They tracked nothing. Her breathing, if it could be called that, was a shallow, intermittent wheeze. She smelled like infection. That copper ozone signature, stronger now, mixed with something organic and failing. I passed her. She didn't react. The dormant state held. I reached the gap between the 2 blocking figures and turned sideways to slide through. My uniform shirt brushed against the arm of the man in the football jersey. His skin was cold through the fabric. He didn't move. I was through. The storage room door was closed but unlocked. I opened it, wincing at the faint click of the latch, and looked inside. Empty. The stepladder was where I'd left it, positioned under the ceiling hatch. I turned back and gestured to Priya. She came through the kitchen with the practiced silence of someone who'd spent years moving through hospital rooms where sleep was a fragile commodity. Her footsteps were precise, almost balletic. She navigated the oil slick without a sound and slipped past the 2 dormant figures with inches to spare. Naveen was next. He moved well. Careful, controlled, his sneakers finding dry patches of tile with instinctive accuracy. He was halfway through the gap between the 2 figures when his backpack strap caught on the football jersey man's outstretched hand. The strap pulled taut. Naveen froze. The figure's hand had been hanging at his side, fingers curled. and the strap's buckle had hooked on his index finger. Any movement would tug the arm. Any tug could trigger reactivation. Priya's hand went to her mouth. I gripped the chef's knife. Naveen stood perfectly still, his breathing visible in the cold air leaking from the open cooler behind him. So slowly that time itself seemed to bend. Naveen reached back with one hand and worked the buckle free. The strap slid off the finger without resistance. The figure's arms swayed once, gently like a branch disturbed by a passing bird. Then it settled. Naveen crossed the remaining distance and entered the storage room. Priya pulled him against her. He let himself be held for exactly 2 seconds before straightening and looking at the ladder. "Go," I whispered. Naveen climbed first. He pushed the hatch open and pulled himself onto the roof with an ease that made me envy being 15. Priya followed, less gracefully, but without hesitation. I went last, pulling the ladder up behind me and letting the hatch close. The roof air hit my face like a revelation. Dawn was breaking to the east, a thin line of amber beneath gray clouds. The parking lot below was dotted with motionless figures, many of them showing visible degradation. The ones that had been active for the longest were barely standing, their bodies listing, their movements reduced to twitches and sways. We were out of the box, but we were standing on top of an island surrounded by things that used to be people. The sunrise was obscene in its beauty. Streaks of gold and rose spread across the eastern sky, as if the atmosphere hadn't received the memo about what had happened below it. Birds sang from the tree line behind the strip mall. The air was cool and clean at roof level, scrubbed of the copper ozone stench that permeated the interior below. For 30 seconds, standing on that tar and gravel surface with the first warmth of morning on my face, I could almost believe the world was still intact. Then I looked down. Route 9 was a graveyard of vehicles, cars, trucks, a school bus, a UPS van, all stopped in various attitudes of abandonment. Some had clearly been in collisions, their hoods crumpled against each other. Others simply sat with doors open, as if their drivers had evaporated. Among them, the infected wandered in diminishing patterns. The oldest ones, those from the initial wave, were barely functional. Several had collapsed entirely, lying on the asphalt in contorted positions, still twitching but unable to stand. Others shuffled in tight circles, their motor systems so degraded that forward movement had become impossible. But newer ones moved among them. Fresher, faster, people who'd been bitten in the later waves. During escape attempts, in their homes, in shelters that failed. These moved with the fluid, purposeful stride of the recently turned, and seeing them beside the degraded, first-wave infected created a sickening time-lapse effect, like watching a disease's entire life cycle compressed into a single panoramic view. "There," Priya pointed west along Route 9. About half a mile away, a line of military vehicles was visible. Humvees and what looked like troop transports, parked in a diagonal formation across the road. A checkpoint. Figures moved around the vehicles with the coordinated urgency of organized response. Living figures. Human figures. "National Guard," I said. "Or Army. Either way, they're holding that line. If we can reach them, half a mile through that." I gestured at the road below us. Priya scanned the landscape with the same clinical focus she'd applied to the monitors inside. The fresh ones are concentrated around the stalled vehicles. They're drawn to the residual stimuli. Running engines, headlights, car alarms. The road shoulders are clearer. The tree line along the north side has minimal activity. She was right. The infected clustered around sources of noise and light, the way insects cluster around a lamp. The spaces between those clusters, the shadows, the quiet margins, were relatively empty, not safe. Nothing was safe, but passable. "We move along the tree line," I said. "Stay low, stay quiet. No running unless we have to. Running makes noise and noise draws them." Naveen had been studying the north side of the building, where the KFC's lot bordered a narrow drainage ditch, and then a stand of mixed hardwoods. "There's a service ladder on the northeast corner," he said. "Fixed rungs, goes down to the HVAC platform, and then to the ground." I walked to the corner and looked. He was right. A maintenance ladder, bolted to the exterior wall, descended to a small concrete platform where the external HVAC component sat, then continued to ground level. The area directly below was clear. No infected visible within 50 feet. The drainage ditch ran north into the tree line and roughly paralleled Route 9 heading west toward the military checkpoint. "That's our route," Priya said. "Down the ladder, through the ditch, along the tree line, west to the checkpoint." I looked at both of them. Priya's face held the same controlled intensity it had carried all night, but her eyes were different now. They held something that hadn't been there in the darkness of the cooler. Direction, purpose, a fixed point to move toward instead of a perimeter to defend. Naveen adjusted his backpack straps. Inside was the first aid kit, the remaining water bottles, and his cracked phone. He'd left the paperback novel in the cooler. I didn't ask why. Some things you leave behind because carrying them would mean admitting you're never coming back for them. I climbed onto the ladder first. The metal rungs were cold and slick with morning dew. Below me, the drainage ditch cut a muddy line toward the trees. Beyond the trees, the military checkpoint gleamed in the new sun like a promise someone else had made on my behalf. I started climbing down. The ditch was 18 inches deep and running with brown water from overnight condensation. We moved through it in single file. Me first, then Naveen, then Priya. Crouched below the lip of the embankment that separated the commercial lots from the tree line. The mud sucked at our shoes with every step, producing a soft, rhythmic sound that I monitored obsessively. Quiet enough. Barely. The tree line was 20 feet to our left. Route 9 was 40 feet to our right. Between us and the road, the infected moved in their deteriorating orbits around the stalled vehicles. I kept my eyes on the nearest ones and tracked their patterns. The degraded first-wave walkers were no longer a direct threat. Most couldn't maintain pursuit even if they detected us. The fresh ones were the danger, and they were harder to predict. Their movements were more responsive, more reactive to subtle changes in their environment. We covered the first 200 yards without incident. The ditch curved slightly, following the terrain, and for a stretch of about 50 feet, we lost visual contact with the road entirely. The trees thickened here, their branches forming a canopy that filtered the morning light into shifting patterns on the muddy ground. It was almost peaceful. Almost. Then Naveen stopped. I turned. He was staring at something through the trees to our right. I followed his gaze and saw a house. A small colonial set back from the road behind a chain-link fence. The front door was open. On the porch, a woman sat in a rocking chair, completely still. Not infected still, human still. She was wrapped in a blanket, holding a shotgun across her lap, and she was watching us. I raised both hands, palms out. Universal gesture of non-threat. She didn't move, didn't speak, didn't aim the weapon. Just watched. Priya leaned close to my ear. "Keep moving. We can't help her, and she doesn't want our help." She was right. The woman on the porch had made her choice. She'd fortified her home, armed herself, and decided to hold her ground. It was a valid survival strategy. Arguably more rational than ours, which involved trudging through a drainage ditch toward a military checkpoint that might or might not still be operational when we arrived. We moved on. The woman watched until the trees obscured her completely. I never learned her name. She exists in my memory as a fixed image. Blanket, shotgun, rocking chair, silence. A portrait of solitary resolve that I've revisited more times than I can count. At the 400-yard mark, the ditch shallowed and we had to leave its cover. We climbed the embankment and moved along the tree line itself, stepping over roots and fallen branches. The road was more visible here, and so were we. I picked up the pace. A fresh one saw us. It was standing near a minivan about 60 feet away. Young, maybe early 20s, wearing a server's apron from one of the restaurants down the road. Its head turned toward us with that slow mechanical pivot that I now recognized as target acquisition. It took its first step in our direction. "Don't run," I whispered. "Walk steady." We walked. The infected server followed. Its gait was quick, but imprecise. It hadn't degraded yet, but whatever was driving it didn't process terrain variations well. It stumbled on the road shoulder, regained itself, kept coming. 2 more turned toward us. Drawn not by sound, we were quiet, but by the movement of the first. A cascading attraction, one triggering the next, building a small pursuit group from previously dormant individuals. Marcus, Priya said. Her voice was tight. I see them. The military checkpoint was visible now. 300 yards ahead, I could see soldiers. I could see a barricade of concrete jersey barriers. I could see a mounted spotlight, still burning in the growing daylight. I could also see soldiers raising weapons in our direction. I stopped, raised both arms above my head. Naveen and Priya did the same. We're alive, I shouted. It was the loudest sound I'd made in 8 hours, and it felt like breaking a sacred rule. 3 survivors. We're not infected. The spotlight swung toward us. Behind us, the pursuit group grew to 7. I heard boots moving, orders being shouted, the mechanical sound of a gate being opened. Run, a soldier's voice called through a megaphone. Run now. We ran. They processed us in a field tent behind the barricade. Blood tests, temperature checks, pupil response examinations. A 12-minute observation period that we all understood the significance of without anyone explaining it. We sat on folding cots wrapped in foil blankets and watched the clock on the tent wall count out the longest 12 minutes of our lives. We passed, all 3 of us, human and whole and still ourselves. Priya was absorbed into the medical unit within the hour. Her skills were worth more than any weapon in the compound. Naveen was placed with a group of civilian miners in a guarded area, his backpack still on, his expression still that unreadable composite of awareness and endurance. I gave my report to a sergeant who typed everything into a laptop with a cracked screen. He asked me to describe the interior of the KFC, the number of infected, the structural failures. I told him everything. He thanked me and moved on to the next survivor. I sat on my cot and stared at my hands. They still smelled like fryer grease and cold steel. I was alive because a door held, a doctor knocked, and a 15-year-old had read an operations manual out of boredom. I never went back to that building, but some nights I still hear the beeping of a door that wouldn't seal.